don't know if any of you heard him speak at Coolville. He was in Coolville, gosh, I don't know, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 8. Okay. 8 years ago.
Yeah, it was 2020. Yeah.
So we're excited that Athens is one of his first stops on this nationwide book tour. And I'm gonna read, I mean, I know Justin, but I can't do his bio in my head because I just know him as Justin Noble, excellent writer and exposer of dastardly deeds. Justin did get his bachelor's degree in Earth and Environmental Science from Duke University and then went on to Columbia University to get his master's in Earth and Environmental Science. And as an investigative journalist, I don't know if any of you read his work, but he's researched and reported on oil and gas development across the U.S. And his most recent book, Petroleum 238. So for 7 years, Justin traveled through the industrial sacrifice zones of Alabama, New York, and of course Ohio, learning from people who have endured the consequences of industry's recklessness. In Petroleum 238, Justin documents the lack of regulation throughout the fossil fuel industry and talks about the loopholes in the gas and how waste has been spilled, spread, injected, dumped, and emitted across the country, including being used to fertilize crops and de-ice roads and even to build school playgrounds. Justin dedicated his book to 10 people who have passed. Now, all 10 of these people, which is in the dedication of the book, are people who were warriors in environmental activism. And some of the work, each one of these people, the only person the 2 people I don't know are Stuart Smith and Shirley Palmer. Everybody else I've been familiar with. And I just want to read you, because my mentor and dear friend, Teresa Mills, who was executive director of Buckeye Environmental Network for a number of years and worked with Lois Gibbs after the Love Canal incident, worked with CHEJ. Teresa unexpectedly passed away in December, and so she has passed her torch on to Anton and the new executive director, Zach Goldheimer. But some of us are still here and able to carry on that work. But I just want to read you what Justin has said about our friend Teresa. Teresa Mills, self-taught environmental badass and relentless advocate for the people and the earth. And that's Justin's way of describing the people that he has met and known and have helped him with the stories that he is about to share. And I want to share a video that was made. This is Carolyn Harding from Columbus and the Grassroots Radio Show. And her good friend Nate Murray, who did the video, is just a tiny representation of what you're going to hear just
You are looking at an untold story that burns below the surface across America. You are looking at West Virginia's version of Chernobyl. This fracking waste treatment plant in Fairmont, West Virginia opened in 2013 as Fairmont Brine. Executives boasted about the plant, and the facility won an industry award for innovation. 5 years later, Fairmont Brine went out of business and left a site deeply contaminated. The samples we gathered here reveal parts of the site are more contaminated with radioactivity than most of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Many people don't realize, but a lot more comes to the surface out of well than just the oil and gas. Across the U.S., 3 billion gallons of wastewater a day, often loaded with enough radium to be legally considered radioactive by EPA. My reporting has shown that time and again, these plants have failed to treat the complex brew of radioactivity, metals, salts, and toxic chemicals inherent to fracking waste.
At Fairmont Brine, there was really nothing to protect us from radiation. Radium wasn't talked about at all.
This is just the beginning. My upcoming book, Petroleum 238, Big Oil's Dangerous Secret and the Grassroots Fight to Stop It, is the result of a 7-year reporting journey. Radioactive oil-filled waste has been spilled, spread, dumped, injected, and freely emitted across America. The book relies on community activists, industry workers, scientists, and academics, and over 100 years of academic research, and also never before published industry and government documents to provide a series of game-changing reveals into the world's most powerful industry.
That video is so super. That is a great video. I don't know what you all thought, but
That's great.
they really, as filmmakers do, that was a monstrous amount of footage. And I think 3 or 4 different times we went to that site, and Carolyn and me distilled it into something TikTokable. So, yeah, we can start right there, actually. That's a really good place to start. It's a really alarming place to start. But I think one thing the video portrays, which is really important in the type of reporting I do, is that people on the ground in communities, activists, organizers, workers, people paying attention to harms, this is really the front lines of investigative journalism. And there is sometimes a stigma in journalists that, activists have their point of view, they're not necessarily to be trusted, which my counter to that is, well, if you get a press release from Shell for a new project, and you write the story and don't go and interview and talk to health experts and talk to people who are worried about harms from that project, you are actually an activist journalist, but you're an activist for the wrong side. You're an activist in favor of the corporation. And in journalism, true journalism is not about upholding people and entities that are already powerful. And a lot of that type of journalism continues to be done around this industry, and it's a big problem. But there also is a beautiful groundswell of people paying attention to the voices and voices in communities, and that is really critical. So that is how I learn things, that's how I find out things, and that's how I can have eyes and ears in like 1,000 different places at once. And I'll get to, it's kind of too dramatic to even start with it, I'll get to how we were led to that facility, because that is a rare peek under the lid. I've been reporting on this topic, like Roxanne said, for 7 years, and it took a long time to actually find myself on the grounds of a fracking treatment plant with a really wonderful crew. That was Jill Humphrey there with Ohio Valley Ally. She's in this area as well. And Dr. Gary Gorby, a former Department of Energy scientist, well-trained with a Geiger counter, and you could really learn a lot. But we're going to build back up to that. I really do thank y'all for coming. It's so fun to be here. I really appreciate it. It's a nice spring day. And I'm going to start, I often get into issues like this. This is local or regional at least. But I want to start with the book and start with the story that is not something I usually talk about, because the book is new and the book is really a reporting journey across the entire country. It's not just here in Appalachia that we have oil and gas development. The U.S. is an oil and gas nation. The U.S. is one of the nations that really helped create this industry across the world. And there are stories all across the U.S. and oil fields all across the U.S. So I'm going to start actually in Louisiana and just read y'all a little something from Louisiana before I get into some of the issues that I know are really prescient right here. So let's do that. And we're actually starting here in rural Mississippi. Mississippi is an important oil and gas state, not so much right now, but played, there still is oil and gas being developed there, played a really important role in the middle part of last century. And this, just to set the stage, this is the first chapter of the book. I'm going to skip over the beginning, but essentially there is, and I like starting with this because I'm trying to tell people there's more in this book than just, a toolkit for activism, which absolutely is. It is really a story through America. It's a journey through America. And so here in this chapter, at the beginning of the book, we start at a gas station in just outside Brookhaven, Mississippi, Piney Woods. And I had known about these legal cases. There were early legal cases in the 1980s, 1990s, involving a certain type of oil field worker. And Mississippi, the oil and gas formation, like in many parts of the country there's conventional oil, it's kind of like popcorn kernels around the state. So there's some really rich little sections of the formation, and then you literally go down the street and at the other end of the neighborhood, and you're out of the formation. When you're in it, there's a lot of oil. And this job developed of cleaning pipes, and I was looking for this buried story, and a lot of this book is also buried stories, things that would literally get blown away in the wind, and that's one of our tasks as a storyteller, to gather them and make sure they don't. And I found it, and so I'm inside the gas station talking to Janice, whose family has run this gas station and also played this role early on. Okay, the pipe would be on rollers, recalls Janice. Daddy would have one man running the part of the machine that the drill bit or water jet chewed into, and another man at the other end of the pipe, the catcher. My daddy and both my brothers worked in it, she continues. We had 2 or 3 black men that worked in it too, and there certainly wasn't any protective gear for the workers, gloves and a hard hat. But my daddy was innocent. He didn't know he was exposing anyone. Daddy come to find out the oil companies knew about the contamination, but they never told us. The big boys swept it under the rug. Our case proved it. We had a lawyer. I never thought I would forget his name, but she has, although her cousin Linda remembers. Stuart Smith. That's right, says Janice. Stuart Smith. Let me tell you something. He ate that Chevron lawyer up and down. And now we're going to go into Stuart, who is one of the most amazing characters I've ever met. Stuart also recently passed, but yeah, class act. Born in New Orleans, Stuart's father was a gambler, and he dropped out of high school at age 15, but encouraged by a hardworking mother, eventually graduated law school. He was motivated for justice after a freak accident in which his younger brother was hit by a car, then dropped on his head while he lifted into the ambulance. And this is a quote, "I wanted to hold people accountable for hurting others," Stuart wrote in his book, Crude Justice. It's a book about his life and he wanted to fight big corporations. His brother lay for several days brain dead in the hospital before his mother decided to remove him from life support and donate his organs. Stuart first fell into the world of oil field radioactivity one day in 1989 at age 29. He took a cold call from a man named Winston Street running an oil field pipe cleaning operation in Laurel, Mississippi, 85 miles east of the folks we just met, Janice and Linda. They had also taken pipes from Chevron and Shell, and radioactive scale had contaminated the property, the workers' bodies, and even relatives and family members. Quote, "I had to roll the dice on this one," Stuart wrote. "You eat what you kill," his mentor, Jack Harang, a well-known New Orleans trial attorney, had told him. Quote, "If you don't kill, you don't eat." Stuart would soon learn valuable knowledge, and this becomes very important for us here. After the use of nuclear weapons in World War II, radioactivity was to be regulated by the Atomic Energy Commission and later the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. While radiation generated in nuclear energy and medicine were included in regulations, oil field radioactivity never was. No one had tried an oil field pipe cleaning case before, but the harms appeared massive. Potentially, there would be a lot to eat. Though up against 2 of the planet's most powerful corporations, the kill might be difficult. Quote, "As I sat in our small downtown New Orleans office, building the case became a nonstop obsession," Stuart wrote. Early on, Shell settled, but Chevron continued forward, practicing what Stuart called a scorched earth policy, trying to break them financially, maybe even spiritually, by dragging out the case. Quote, "It was a risky strategy," he wrote, "but if it worked, the oil giant would have squelched similar lawsuits from other pipe cleaning yards that it did business with." The truth was becoming apparent for Stuart. This was a much bigger problem than a single pipe cleaning yard in a single state. Stuart had discovered an extraordinary oil field secret. Quote, "The failure to properly protect workers or warn them of the health risks was instead a standard industry practice carried out across the United States and all around the globe," he wrote. "In the industry's wake, one could expect a trail of radiation sickened oil field workers and liability in the billions. Stewart wondered if the pipe rattlers of Laurel, Mississippi did not represent the radium boys of the latter 20th century. He also learned that because radioactive pipe scale was so difficult to remove, and again, we still see this tactic playing out, the generous nature of the industry. Because radioactive pipe scale was so difficult to remove, the industry often gave up on the task and donated pipes to ranchers across Louisiana and Texas for building fences. You need a lot of fence, you need a lot of pipe, and schools across Louisiana and Mississippi to construct fences and playgrounds. I start there because if you're paying attention to the industry, the cynical nature, the almost devious craftiness of it, that was there. That was always there. And one thing I learned as I started to report on this across the country, and especially in states like Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, where there's a really well-established oil field industry, and just it's really part of the mythos of these states, is just what this industry has done in the past and what they had to do really to exist. And so I'll get into kind of a little bit of the science that really leads to the book. But there is a lot more happening at an oil and gas well than just oil and gas coming up. We think of the oil and gas, the fuel for cars, homes. We think of carbon, emissions, methane, carbon dioxide. And these are elements, right? But there's also an incredible amount of waste coming up. When we say waste, I'm really referring to really interesting things from deep within the earth, often quite natural, but happen to have extraordinary toxic properties. So the industry's primary waste stream is brine or produced water. And even these names, I think, are well crafted to make us think that these are not harmful things. Brine and produced water really can be considered the thing that the industry produces. Many wells produce more brine than they do oil or gas. Across the US, every day, 3 billion gallons of brine. That's 1 trillion gallons a year. So a nice visual we can do, you take that 1 trillion gallons, you put it into a standard oil barrel, salt someone's land, you destroy its ability to produce crops. So in Ohio and North Dakota, this was an issue. There's a great group in North Dakota called the Salted Lands Council. There is farmland across North Dakota, and this group focuses on it, it's untenable now because of brine spills. But brine also has heavy metals, and it also has radioactive heavy metals, including the element radium. Radium is a metal, it's a radioactive metal. And radium has some really interesting properties. Unlike a lot of the radioactive metals within the earth, and we live on a radioactive planet, there's uranium and thorium speckled in the rocks all around us. The ground is venting off radon. But certain practices can concentrate, and oil and gas happens to be one of those practices. Brine in the formation, this salty water, is good at kicking out a lot of these different metals from the formation. Again, radium is just a metal, and radium is a moderately soluble metal. And it turns out there's a relationship between the saltiness of the brine and the radium. The more salt there is, the more radium tends to not be stuck to the rock in the formation below, but rather moved trained in the water and then flow with the brine to the surface. The Marcellus, by the way, has some of the highest salt levels, and so following this relationship, it's not a big surprise that it's some of the highest radium levels. And we'll do a quick little lesson on what does that mean, high radium levels. So Stewart mentioned there in his quote, he talks about the Radium Girls, and I imagine many folks may know about them. A really important story of industrial contamination in this country. Often women painting watches and clocks with this radioactive paint. It's a really neat trick. The radium causes zinc in the paint to be excited, to give off, I don't know if it's actually effervescent, that's the correct scientific term, but it's the radium that's firing off an alpha particle that excites the zinc, and it glows. And so these watches glow, and that's really cool. The problem is the women were painting them, very fine tips, and then they lift the brush. Yeah, and over time, ingested, and you don't, swallow a lot, but over time ingested enough radium to develop some really horrific bone cancers. And the photos, and you can search them, are really quite tragic. Radium is regarded by the medical community as a bone seeker. It has a similar chemical makeup to calcium, and this is wonderful. You just go back, you don't have it here, but imagine, high school science periodic table, things in the same column, the outside of those elements, are similar, right? And radium and calcium are in the same column. They are similar, and your body ends up taking calcium into your bones that is, used by your body. Your body will also take some of the radium into the bones, and this is what happens to these women. So, backstory of radium, go now to brown, we've got radium in it, so EPA is worried about radium. EPA does not want radium in the drinking water. The limit that EPA has set is 5 picocuries per liter. Curie, coming from Marie Curie, by the way, 2 Nobel Prizes, not 1, 2. And her name is there on this unit. But we can just remember the 5 picocuries per liter. That's EPA's limit for radium in drinking water. At 60, EPA defines a liquid waste stream as radioactive, which is really quite significant. 60 picocuries per liter, not so much more than the 5 limit, and we're going to define a liquid waste stream as, quote, radioactive. And that has important ramifications. Brine in the Marcellus, as tested by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and I bring that up, not necessarily Ohio study, but it's the same formation, is because they did a study and actually looked at this, averages 9,330 picocuries per liter, and has been found as high as 28,500. So we're looking at 5, 60, and 9,330, 20,000. So brine can and should, technically according to EPA's own rules, be considered a radioactive waste stream. It goes around in unmarked trucks. There's a variety of reasons for that. And then we get into an even more significant problem when it comes to sludge. I told Roxanne I want to keep the coffee because I'm going to use this as a prop, right? So if you have a good cup of coffee, there's probably some sediment at the bottom, right? And it will settle out over time. Same thing in a brine tank, version of the same thing. Brine has a lot of suspended solids in it. And radium, these are just metals. These are things that are mixed in with the brine. So you go to a wellhead, you say, oh, those are all oil tanks. Nope, some of them might be. Many of them will be brine tanks. And in the bottom of those tanks, you'll be accumulating a sludge. Well known by EPA and other industry documents that have assessed this sludge to have very high radioactivity levels. And if you think, again, that if there's a bit of radium in the brine mixed in, if you settle things out as a sludge, the levels are going to be higher. The levels can really be quite extraordinary. And the industry faces an immediate problem here because right now, this does not have to do with oil and gas, but right now many landfills have radiation detectors. And in the early part of the boom here in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, trucks carrying oil field waste, solids, so not the brine, we're talking about the solids, could be drill cuttings, could be the solids that settle out like the sludge. They were so radioactive that they could not get into landfills. The buzzers were going off, the radiation detectors. And so this has led to really a nightmare set of jobs. To exist, the industry had to develop this fix. And because of the regulatory loopholes, the fix is really dangerous. And the fix is called downblending. So at facilities such as not so far away, Martins Ferry, Austin Master Services, it was one of these facilities. Trucks would come in filled with radioactive sludge. They would have something like lime or ground up corn cobs or coal ash, some other material, which has a significantly less radioactivity level, and they would mix these things up. Now, these workers are not being told that they are dealing with radioactivity. They are not being properly protected. They are not even given often a simple face mask or knowledge like, you know what, don't eat and smoke cigarettes at work because you're in a radioactive environment. And I just want to read a passage because this is really, it's a story, it's a book about many things, but the people on the front lines of the contamination are time and again the workers. And again, often spending time in communities such as this, but people, groups like Buckeye Environmental Network, Concerned Ohio River Residents, groups who are in communities and know people because maybe they went to high school with them or maybe they're just interacting with them in the community. And it's these relationships that have been critical in leading workers to have the courage to talk to someone, and then often the next step, if they're really feeling comfortable, would be to talk to me. But it could take years for that relationship to build. But I just want to read about one of these workers who worked at one of these facilities. This chapter is intense. This passage is intense. David has been dealt a tough hand at his work as a laborer at Austin Master from June 2020 through April 2021 fell right in line with a long list of difficulties that he has experienced in life. And just to give you a little background, I learned, and a worker we meet just reveals this particular facility was relying on a tactic of drawing workers recently released from prison and bringing them to work at this facility. Now you might think, oh, well, it's great, to have a job. It's very difficult to get a job coming out of prison as one with good pay. They weren't informed, they weren't protected. Often, a lot of these folks, a lot of these men were addicted to drugs and continued to use drugs while working at this facility. That was one of the pluses for them. And it's really a nightmare situation that was set up. But I think that's an important part of it, and David addresses that. So I just wanted to give you all the context. Okay, and I'm describing now what David's about to lay out. Much of it by this point is familiar to me, such as the treatment of workers. And now David speaking, they treat you like garbage and work you like a slave, says David. The unprotected clothing, the suits they give you tear easily and the crotch gets ripped. A lot of times I just wore a white beater. I was really getting covered in that shit. The failure to inform of even basic risks. Quote, workers would eat, drink, and smoke cigarettes, one after the other with dirty hands. I did the same thing. The health concerns. Quote, since I've been there, my teeth have been falling apart. The drug use, quote, meth, weed, a lot of weed, Suboxone. I heard them talking about doing acid. I never saw that, though I seen them passing it around in the locker room. One guy would sell it to another right on a little strip. I've seen them snort crystal meth right in the locker room too. One worker who's up before me was smoking meth in the locker room and smoking crack in the bathroom. This is a facility dealing with radioactive waste. I learned new things too, contamination I hadn't considered before. Quote, in your nose, eyes sometimes, I've had it in my mouth, and we're always banging ourselves open, so it's probably getting in our bloodstream too through our cuts and sores. The way things were kept from inspectors with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, David again, we always knew when ODNR was coming and would hide hot stuff in the back of the steel mill. The facility was in an old steel mill. And the details of just how they loaded the rail cars that went to the Utah radioactive waste disposal site. So this is interesting. This facility, actually, the material that they settled out when they're doing this downblending process, they are able to get much of the waste low enough, possibly, although you'll hear David's take on this in a moment, to take to a local landfill. And often these landfills, in this case, were in Pennsylvania. But there's some waste that is just too radioactive. They absolutely can't do that. So they're shipping it to a really a formal, low-level radioactive waste disposal site in the Utah desert. It's about the best place you could put something like that. I haven't investigated, so I don't know what groundwater situations they have, but a desert environment is better than a humid, rainy environment. So they're sending it there, and Energy Solutions, I did deal with this company many times, level of training and knowledge about these workers. But what happened is I learned in the reporting process that these rail cars were leaking. They arrived 5 different times leaking, which means they leak across the country. But David, now gives us some context on why that may have happened. And this is David speaking again. We'd spend days under those rail cars with foam and Flex Seal plugging up holes so they wouldn't leak. Once they get out of here, who the hell cares? Anything to get it out the door. David says 3 trucks a day, one from Austin Master to a local landfill. And like Rob in North Dakota, another worker we just met, he conveys that the practice of loading them up with waste was not an exact science. Quote, a lot of trucks got screwed up, a lot of trucks got sent out hot. Yeah, those are going to local regular landfills. And I'm just going to read this because I think this speaks to the tone of the book. I'm regularly relaying to state and federal regulators what I'm finding out from workers like David concerning oil and waste treatment facilities and regularly asking them detailed questions. Here are some of their answers. Let me just go through a list. This is Ohio Department of Health. While the Ohio Department of Health has been designated as the Ohio Radiation Control Agency, there are certain instances when ODH's authority is exceeded by other statutory authorities. One of these instances includes regulation of the oil and gas industry in Ohio. So, sorry, David. Here's Ohio Department of Natural Resources. The division does not have the authority to levy fines. Nonetheless, the division strives to ensure regulated entities are complying with chief's orders, Ohio law, and rule. I'll explain in a moment what that means. But basically that means we actually can't regulate this facility. But we try to do the best we can to make sure everything's going okay. Here's North Dakota, so to know that this crosses states. North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality. We went from a rural agrarian society to a rural industrial society overnight. We didn't know what we didn't know. I'll take that, but when there's human harms on the end, I think we've got to do a little bit more due diligence. And then this is pretty interesting. This is coming from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The waste products from the oil and gas drilling operations you described are referred to as technologically enhanced naturally occurring radioactive material, or TNORM. We do not regulate or license this material. My understanding is that the Environmental Protection Agency is the federal regulator of TNORM, oil and gas waste. Well, let's ask them. And here's EPA. EPA does not regulate radioactivity in oil and gas production, processing, and transport systems. EPA does not regulate the radioactive content of sludge, scale, drill cuttings, and fracking sands, and so does not collect data on radioactive content or estimates of volumes generated. There is no one federal agency that specifically regulates the radioactivity brought to the surface by oil and gas development. That's EPA's own words to me on this. And so you see the kind of chasm, the abyss of reason that this industry is operating in. There's a lot more, and there's a couple other things I think are really important to address for this community, but I know it's a lot and it's heavy, and you all probably have really, really big questions, so I want to open it up.
Not meaning to piss off our local Dems, but have things improved when we have Democrats as presidents?
Oh, no.
No.
Things improve when local groups do effective organizing and get the ear of, and it doesn't have to be the president, it can be a city council, a local representative, and it's always on the ground local organizing. No one that I know of in a position of power is going to have time to get this. It's too complicated. But take these folks, for example, if they do good organizing, and they do, you can start to get people's attention, and then you work your way up. And it doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, Independent. I've learned that is really inconsequential for this issue. Some people, and you can't often predict who it's going to be, will just say, you know what, I'm going to listen to Roxanne, I'm going to listen to Anton, and let me hear them out. And then you can slowly start to build an ally. I just came from Pennsylvania at the state capitol where we have a precedent, and it is a Democrat, State Senator Katie Muth, but she has also worked with a Republican across the aisle on the issue of injection wells. So I would say both parties have really failed on this issue, but I think there's hope in either case, especially when you look at workers. I mean, this industry was really sold to these communities and this area on the jobs and on the good jobs and on uplifting people who have struggled economically. And when you start to learn that you have been duped and deceived, which many of the workers who come to me, that's why they're coming to me. They are mad. That it flips the narrative on this idea that it's been a great job generating machine. I mean, what we really have to do is see, it's been a cancer generating machine. We don't know exactly how much yet because no one's picked up all the pieces. But the workers, I think, have really suffered. And the politicians, I would say, need to be held accountable for that. But really good question. Good to bring that up. No, great question. So the question is on injection wells specifically. And so we have, imagine that line of barrels to the unit. In the early days, spilled right into the environment. That isn't happening anymore. What we do now, 96% of that waste will go to injection wells, which is what this gentleman just asked about. That's a huge waste stream going to these things, which, I mean, even they have a name that sounds very formal. EPA has an underground injection control program. It is regulated. There's regulations wrapped around it, and they're regarded as rigorous regulations, at least compared to a lot of other things in the oil and gas industry. Injection wells are well regulated. What I found through this reporting is that there is no, and I'm going to read you all the passages, there is no scientific merit behind this idea of injection wells. There's none. They have crafted a science out of whole cloth. And I, early on, and for one, I want to say, I mean, if you describe this to a child, there's an injection well that you mentioned, there'd be 100 trucks over a 24-hour period lined up with fracking waste. Now, we're not just talking about brine, which has these really interesting, concerning salts, heavy metals, radioactivity, and can have benzene, can have hydrocarbon elements. We're talking about flowback, which has a really unknown group of toxic chemicals used in the frac. Some of that stays down in the earth, which is problematic, but a good bit of it comes back up, and that has a different name. That's called flowback. That will be mixed in with these trucks. That will be mixed in with the brine. And I've spoken to many brine haulers, and they tell me, and they've used the same language. We don't just haul brine. We don't just haul flowback. We haul whatever the hell they want off that path, and can fit in my truck. That's all going to go to an injection well. So again, let's go to a kindergarten class and explain. We've got these trucks of unknown toxic waste, and we're going to inject it in this hole right next to your playground. And there are injection wells. There's an injection well in Cambridge, right on the edge of a shopping plaza. You can watch the trucks dump their waste from Taco Bell. And there's a visceral reaction like that doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound right because it isn't right. So I'm going to read this, and I think this, I'm especially, I'm excited to lay this out in this community because this is important. And this is the type of material that needs to be brought back against these companies. So we're going to start, one, conveying EPA had no faith injection wells were going to work. And then I'm going to cut to this really important conference. And this was like, you find something, this actually is written in gold, which is wonderful, but this is like journalistic gold. Underground Waste Management and Environmental Implications. It's a 1971 conference on underground waste management, on injection wells. It was held in Houston, Texas, between the U.S. Geological Survey, and it says right here on the seal, Association of Petroleum Geologists. We're going to go through what they said. And just because I know there's big interest, I'm going to read through all of it because it's all important. These early papers on injection wells appear to fracture the notion that injection wells are a safe storage locker for industrial waste, but there is more. In October 1970, David Dominick, commissioner of the Federal Water Quality Administration, which in 2 months would become part of the brand new EPA, warned that injection was a short-term fix to be used with caution and, quote, only until better methods of disposal are developed. When EPA laid out its proposed policy on injection wells in 1974, the agency echoed Dominick's concerns, stating in an internal statement on the subject that EPA's, quote, policy considers waste disposal by deep well injection to be a temporary means of disposal. The statement continues, quote, should a more environmentally acceptable means of disposal become available, change to such technology would be required. It was a short-term fix. It was literally shoving it under the carpet. They knew that, and they're like, well, we better not let this thing run away. Now we'll go to the conference. But nothing of the sort has happened. Rather, injection wells have become so much a part of the American fabric. They've been allowed to operate on the edge of a shopping plaza in Cambridge, Ohio. That's where the Taco Bell is, also a Verizon store. Within eyeshot of a kitchen window in Vienna, Ohio. Down the street from a daycare center for handicapped adults in Portsmouth, Ohio. And one morning out in West Texas, I observed a food stand selling tacos in the dusty parking lot of an injection well. And this is important. I asked, in this case, in 2020, I asked Dr. Bill Alley, Director of Science and Technology at the National Groundwater Association and former Chief of the Office of Groundwater with the U.S. Geological Survey, what eventually happens to all the injected waste? This is always the question I was bringing. Where does it go? Where does it go? And is it going to stay there for 50 years, 100? Is it eternity? It's going to be, we know bolts are shifting. I don't believe it when they tell me eternity. So I asked this individual who was head of the Office of Groundwater, what happens to waste? He said, I never looked at it in detail. It's not a problem that I have any direct experience with beyond textbook type diagrams. And everything is at stake with this, and that's what this person told me. And I fact-checked, ran it by him, and he changed one word. It's amazing. But eventually we found this book. Eventually I'm led to a 1971 talk by Stanley Greenfield, what a hero, Assistant Administrator for Research and Monitoring at the newly formed EPA. And the title of Stanley's talk and paper is amazing, EPA, the Environmental Watchman. Deep well injection, says Greenfield, is a technology of avoiding problems, not solving them in any real sense. We really do not know what happens to the waste down there. We just hope. This is the EPA saying this. Greenfield provides an analogy. There may be another parallel with our current concern over dumping waste at sea. Men have long assumed that if you take this stuff out far enough and sink it deep enough, no harm will result, that the oceans are so voluminous that they can dilute anything to innocuous levels. We know now that this assumption is wrong. The sea is soilable, the Earth's crust is soilable too, and vulnerable to damage by man's activities, not only in ways that we may predict and make allowances for, but also in unexpected ways. And I want to read one more quote. There's quite a lot from that book. I won't read it all. It's there in the book if you got it. But this is so cool. So I'm going through this conference. I mean, I read all of it. This is how, I dork out, geek out on the science. And I'm like, this is amazing. And then, but there's always like someone who gets it better. Where's like the Da Vinci of research hydrologists? One who really, and I found described a very complicated process so simply. And so here's John Ferris describing why injection wells are never going to work. For one, says Ferris, the term impermeable is never an absolute. All rocks are permeable to some degree. So the idea that any rock layer could act as a cork to seal off waste is simply wrong. Waste will always and inevitably escape the injection zone. Always and inevitably. Quote, and engulf everything in its inexorable migration toward the discharge boundaries of the flow system, meaning a water well, a spring, an oil or gas well, a basement drain, even the roots of plants or a seed on the side of the road. This is amazing science. Interestingly, Ferris explains, wells, springs, and basement drains might first surge with fresh water, which is being pushed out of the way by the advancing front of waste, but eventually, quote, the sinister laggard, the waste cylinder, arrives, and in time, he continues, this contamination will become apparent at ever-increasing distances from the injection site. And I'll do a little diagram of what Ferris is describing. So here you have your injection well, 100 trucks a day, each truck is like 4,000 to 5,000 gallons, huge amount of waste. What you're really doing here is playing with a trick of compression. There's more pressure deeper down, right? So you can kind of like, you can cram more stuff down deep than you can at the surface. Now the Earth has porous layers as laid out here, but they, again, are not shut off from other layers, and they also are not existing in isolation. So you have the waste going down and it's forming this bulb of waste down there. But it's porous, right? So any porous layer below the Earth would have already filled up, likely with something such as groundwater or such as oil and gas. So if you have groundwater down there, it's now being pushed out of the way by the waste. And that's what Ferris describes. So you have the waste being shut down, and there's a front of groundwater that's getting pushed out of the way. And so here, a farm over here is like, my spring is running really well. My well is doing good. This is so weird. It's not rainy, and all of a sudden I've got great water pressure. But what Ferris lays out, eventually the waste will arrive, and then you have a big problem. And we have injection wells now that are leaking across this state. And this has really been, it was predicted, 50 years ago. I will give credit, again, to the local groups that have held the state accountable on this. Buckeye Environmental Network, Torch Can Do, another local one, and there are others. The state has acted, and this is very valuable. ODNR has looked at these injection wells and says they pose a risk to drinking water. They pose a risk to surface water and the environment. That is valuable, and that I would say is the state doing its job. And my question to them is, do you really think it's just these three that you found that are leaking? We should, if it were a different industry, we would say, let's shut them all down and we're going to do an assessment to see if this process works. Now, if you did that, oil and gas production would stop overnight because they'd have, 28 barrels to the moon and back to deal with, and they don't know where to put it. So, well, we could push for that. Yeah.
Hi, Heather Cantina. We met whenever you came last. It felt like a lot longer than 4 years ago. I think we need to use a different word than leak because that implies that it's in a containment.
Yeah.
And when I first heard the term injection well, I thought there was actually like a steel tank or something.
Yes.
And it's not leaking, it's migrating, it's moving as all material under the earth does, especially with extra pressure being applied.
Yeah.
So We need a different
No, I
word.
really agree. No, that's spot on, and Ferris would agree with you. Yeah, leak implies it's there and then it spills out. You're totally right. It was never contained.
Right.
It's just flowing through, and we haven't seen it pop out yet. Yeah.
Leaking from a ditch.
Yeah, no, really, really good point. And yeah, the words are important, so I'm totally with you.
And I've heard a couple places that they are now trying to reuse the brine instead of fresh water. Is that true or false?
You all ask such good questions. You lead right to, it's like I planted you in the audience. Yes, so now we can go back to the video. That is absolutely true. Again, we're dealing with a cunning industry, and they want to survive, and they want to continue to make profit. Smart folks like you are saying, wait, injection wells don't work out. They're not even leak, they're constantly just, migrating waste into the environment. Communities across the country do not like injection wells. They might love oil and gas. They might not see the connection, but they'll say, no, we don't want injection wells. Fine with a frac well, no injection wells. So communities are reacting against that. The industry recognizes on some level that there is an issue, and they are trying to move towards treatment. It's absolutely a thing, and it is a major thing. So what was happening at the facility in the video is they were trying to treat produced water. Now this would seem very simple.
To reuse it
Exactly,
rather
yes.
than fresh.
Yes, so what they, and this is an important point, because this is how it's sold to not just the community, but the workers. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna pretend, I'm not pretending I'm that person, I'm just pretending I'm an industry person selling this idea. We're gonna take the fracking wastewater, and we are gonna produce water that can be reused. It's not drinkable, but it can be used to frack the well. So we don't have to drop in your creek or your river or your lake anymore. That's great for the environment. So you all should be for this plan. We're really excited to bring it to your community. We're gonna do that. And there's a lot of salt in brine. So we're gonna take that salt, and we've got a great product for you. We're gonna make a rolled salt material. And legitimately in a lot of rural communities, keeping roads clear of snow and ice in winter, keeping dust on in summer is a major expense. So if someone's giving you that for free, that's really exciting. So this is a win-win, everyone.
Not Athens County.
Right, not if you're informed. That's how it's sold. Now what happens is, and I visited these facilities across the country, I have not seen one that's actually lasted longer than 3 or 4 years. Brine, produced water, mixed in with flowback and other things, it's an extraordinarily complex waste stream. And it is very hard to remove things and treat an extraordinarily complex waste stream. And this is coming from a really good geochemist at Penn State and other places that have bounced these questions off of and read their papers. But the salt alone in produced water makes it very tricky to work with from a geochemical level. Often if we're dealing with a substance that has a contaminant and we want to remove the contaminant, industry can use various tricks to kind of like glom onto that one thing we want to get out and pull it out. There's so much stuff in brine that it's very hard to do that, plus the geochemical signature, it just makes it difficult to work with. Even if you successfully do it, even if you can remove all the gunk out of brine, you've just concentrated it, right? So if you have radium mixed in throughout the brine, and you're gonna remove all that radium, and there's an amazing, Anton, do you have that bag I brought in? There's a really cool paper in there.
Yeah.
Amazing American Petroleum Institute paper, which lays it out. If you remove the radioactivity, you inherently concentrate the radioactivity. So what happened at that facility, they're trying to treat the brine, they're not doing it appropriately. When I finally got to speak with the workers, I mean, they described a nightmare facility, constant dust, constant tubes breaking down and just splashing stuff all over the place. It was not being well run appropriately. They were not trained appropriately, protected appropriately, but they accumulated all this sludge, which was just up there on the hillside. So the reason we have that video, there are sites like this across the country. They come up with a
Is
lot
that
of
what that was supposed to be in Fairmont?
yeah, that was it. They're brine, Fairmont brine processing. That is
Okay.
exactly what they wanted to do. But I draw it out because it's an important example. They tell, and I tell this to people in New Mexico. This is a very big thing in New Mexico. Water is in scarce supply. They want to reuse brine. Well, this Fairmont brine processing, one of their representatives went to the Oklahoma State Capitol and stood up in front of the Oklahoma legislature saying, "We got a great thing. We want to bring it to Oklahoma. We're doing it in West Virginia. We got good guys working. We're treating brine." I mean, if you watch the video, he spoke to this. Well, that's what really happened. it's an old abandoned industrial thing, in a rural area. So, I mean, it's got all these weird buildings and weird little lakes and stuff, the radioactive, kids don't know that. So when we went in there, people have been regularly partying, beer cans, mountains of beer cans, soiled mattress. I mean, it was really disgusting. And they're partying in radioactive waste. The only reason we have this knowledge now is because it was so sloppily maintained, the regulations were so paltry that it was just lying open in the wind. There are other sites I would like to walk around with a former Department of Energy scientist with a Geiger counter and check out, but they have fences around them and it's very difficult, and many of them have still security. The waste is sitting there just chilling, but I can't access them. In that place, that was really special, and it's frightening. I mean, what happens when you look under the lid is that. So my answer to are they? Yes, they're absolutely, and it's important that you all are informed about this because that is the next play. Say you all are successful in getting the industry off injection wells, they're already doing this. They're going to say, you know what, you're all right. We never liked them anyway. We're treating it now, and it's green. And this is, and I want to read this. Yeah, and I just want to find this quote that the worker who worked there, because this is just, I just was at the state capitol with this individual. Okay, this is Sean Guthrie, and yes, he came down really, amazing that he did this to Harrisburg for this. He lives in Pennsylvania. So he was excited about this job. He said, I felt good about the job and thought we were doing something beneficial for the environment. He was promoted to operations manager, but by 2017, the company was having trouble paying debts, and the following spring, Fairmont Brine Processing was shuttered. 2 coworkers are now dead from cancer, stomach, and brain, and Guthrie suffers a range of health issues that have sidelined him from normal labor jobs, led him to sell his possessions to pay expenses, and left him wondering if he is unknowingly kept his own life short. I would like to see some accountability, he says. So when they throw out this idea of we're going to treat it, I mean, to me, when I hear that, that means sick workers somewhere down the line, and just an abandoned facility that could become a party spot. Yeah.
I assume a lot of these jobs are going in.
Yeah,
Just
great
wondering
question.
If you could touch on that,
Yeah.
organized labor in that field.
Yeah, no oil for waste job is a union job. Even mentioning, and this is again coming from the workers, mentioning, if you say, hey boss, we're thinking you'd be fired, I mean, you get a text message dismissing you probably, before thinking of that. The only jobs that I'm aware of that are unionized, some well-tending jobs in some of the really big oil field states, but jobs like at a cracker plant, at a refinery, some of the big facilities, those jobs are unionized. And these types of workers, shoveling and scooping around waste, no, absolutely not. And they rely, it's an important question, because the industry relies on, I mean, think of the idea of drawing people out of prison. Those guys they just want to make some money and keep things going. They don't have the effort or energy to try and unionize. And this is laid out in a really courageous workman report. Says if a manager is looking at, let's just say someone has a degree in craft and race, and some guy who just got out of prison is addicted to drugs and desperate, they're going to take that guy because he's more desperate and he's going to do work, the shady stuff and not complain, and that is a modus operandi in the industry.
But is there any way you can have people test their water, their tap water, and their soil with someone, with a company that can put out a report of the brine, the contamination?
No, it's a wonderful question. Thank you. It's a complicated answer, but so there's versions of things to do. The most effective analysis I found is that local and regional academic researchers are involved. There's some really good ones. There's a team at Duke that is focused on this issue. Dr. Avner Vengash and now some of Avner's students. One of the students is at Penn State, Nat Warner, Bill Burgos, also at Penn State, and there's others across the country. And they have done very clever things to try and find this contamination. They were looking often in places, it's a little bit different because they have a known discharge. So say you have a plant like Fairmont Brine that says, we're treating it and we're discharging, but our discharge is totally legit because it's a NIPD's permit, it's permitted National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. I mean, the workers told me that many different instances when the plant was just discharging raw fracking waste into the river and it wasn't being appropriately treated. So in that instance, you can do a check. And so I'm just going to give you examples. It's different, a little bit different in your setting, but like they would, for example, find the discharge point, which takes a lot of like sneaking through underbrush sometimes, and then they would sample downstream and upstream. And one of the studies is amazing. They sampled downstream and they found radium in the sediment at 200 times background, and upstream it was roughly background. Nat Warner looked in mussels, in freshwater mussels, and found oil-filled waste contaminants. Not just the radium, but other heavy metals and other indicators. So there are things you can do when you have a known discharge to try and confirm and say, like I thought, it does seem to be getting into ecosystem. I think it is harder in this sort of situation, but there are markers to look for. So just hearing you talk about stream quality, and this is, this is getting outside of my area of expertise, but there's a wonderful field of assessing streams by looking at microlife in it and what type of flies are laying eggs and things like that. And someone who knows a local landscape very well can provide a lot of knowledge with a sort of assessment of the stream quality life. For something more qualitative, you can take, and I guess the Ginsburg well is not currently in use, right? Is this one that's been shut down?
Closed, but I'm
Right.
wondering, it's leaking.
It's leaky, right? And the waste is also down. So what's happening? Yeah. So I would say, I think that's a good scientific question, and someone who works on this science more so than me would have a better brain to answer it. But there are ways that movement through underground systems can be imaged, and that would be, I think, an important question. You can, and this is what the oil and gas industry does. They look for different, they want to form a map on the ground. And I think you want to do something like that. That probably would have some cost, but if you can engage scientists on this issue, it's important. The USGS actually still has a great group of researchers, and they have a good budget, and they are following this issue. If that's a group that if you can, and their science is slow and it takes a while, but we can learn important things.
The companies are not providing options. I'm just wondering if there's something going on.
Oh, I tried to get, they couldn't even, the same thing as asking about unions. I tried to, I spent a long time trying to figure out ways to get a monitor that looks like a coffee cup or something, so your boss, if you even ask, and this is coming from many workers, if you ask about radioactivity, they'll downplay it, they'll say, no more radiation than on your cell phone. If you ask too much, you're just not the type of worker we want here, so goodbye.
So what's your update on that, Tom?
So before you get to the radioactivity, contaminants in the brine, you just have the issue of driving this unwieldy truck. Brine is very dense. It's a difficult fluid to haul, and it moves around in odd ways on the road. And if you all live around here, brine trucks crash regularly, right? Well, the brine haulers tell me they're trying to save money. They're not fixing the trucks are crap. They're not doing the right repairs. And that driver has had 2 accidents, and each time they tell me, and I believe them, the brakes went on the truck. And they had to make this horrible decision of where do I crash this thing, because they're crashing. And what happened after the second incident is that they now are a liability, and other workers walk through the process of how this happens. But essentially, you're let go once you're in that position. You don't want you, hanging on with this potential, whatever injuries you may have sustained, but also, are you going to come after us in the same way? The easiest thing to do is just let you go. So, although for them, in a way, it is sort of a good thing because now they're kind of forced to get out of the industry. And I'm trying to get them a job within an environmental group, which is really full circle. But yeah.
Thank you, Justin, for